So just to begin, my name is Patrick Ellis. I'm running for student body president. I currently serve as the university's first ever speaker of the student senate. That's a position I helped to craft when the referendum passed. My freshman year in the senate, I was chairman of judiciary, and so I was tasked with, hey, rewrite the entire student government code. So I did, and wrote what this position would do and functionally defined what the role of the vice president was, what the role of the speaker of the senate was, and that kind of got me really invested and interested in kind of that structure and hierarchy and how student government can be used as a vehicle for change through those different positions. So I ran for speaker, served as speaker this year. We got a lot of great things accomplished I'm proud of. Most primarily would be Swipe Out Hunger. That's a program that allows students to donate their extra meal swipes at the end of the meal plan period to students in need on campus. That was really unique for us because although the speaker is specifically a legislative position, that was a program we were able to push out, and that was a really exciting aspect to be kind of the first speaker, was to have things ironed out very well on the legislative side of things, but also be able to push programming. It gave me kind of an interesting dualism there. My other experience on campus started in the Residence Hall Association as president and senator in the Honors Residence Hall. Moved from there, got involved very early with WUSC on campus. Those are just kind of two of the main things I've done. I've also been involved with Pillars for Carolina program in the Student Senate, as I mentioned earlier, and the Legislative Action Network in Student Government, which is a lobbying board that advocates for policies that are beneficial to students at the local and state level. That's kind of my main introduction. From Hampton, South Carolina, junior, studying political science, sociology, and economics.
So, what are, I guess, two main things about your platform that...
The two initiatives I'm most excited about, firstly, would be making Wi-Fi 100% covered campus. So looking kind of at trends in higher education, one thing, I was reading an article today from Inside Higher Ed that said that Wi-Fi is essential to the college campus as water and electricity now. So I think when talking to students about what are the most common issues you face on campus, two things come up time and time again. That's Wi-Fi and that's parking. Both are difficult to fix, but I think have tenable solutions that we can put into mind. If you look at Wi-Fi specifically, we want to make it 100% coverage campus, meaning from the second you step onto campus until the second you step off, you should be connected and have reliable access. I know that's a lofty goal, but I think there's a pretty achievable plan, and there's structures in place that student government can take an active role in lobbying the administration to prioritize it and to make it a reality. Donations for citations is a second really exciting thing on our platform. It continues the work that I've done with food insecurity on our campus, so it specifically looks to target students who donate to whether it's Swipe Out Hunger or other food insecurity combating initiatives on campus like Gamecock Pantry, which is the food pantry. It would allow students to get credit for making those donations and use that credit to pay off parking tickets. So that would help alleviate some of the stresses associated with parking. There's a lot of precedent for this at other SEC schools. The three that I know of to this day is University of Kentucky, Texas A&M, and Missouri University, I'm not sure which it is, but Mizzou has this program as well. A little bit different structure at each institution, but I think it's really valuable to allow students to firstly be able to direct their money to that cause that they support, and secondly is a great way to support food insecurity initiatives that are often untalked about and really rampant, I would say, on campus.
So with the donations for citations, is that something that it's only like university parking tickets? Is that something that you'd partner with the City of Columbia? Because I know a lot of like the parking meters and stuff are from the city.
Step one, I think, would be to partner with the university and then expand that to the city. And I think from a feasibility perspective, internally, it would be a lot easier to start. And I think once we have a good, almost kind of like we've done with Swipe Out Hunger, where you have a pilot program in a beginning place, you can begin to expand it into the city. I think one great way it would be able to work is I ran for speaker on a lot of parking initiatives, and so I had a lot of meetings with city officials like El Matney and Councilman Howard Duvall about how we can fix parking and some of the student issues. So I think it would be very natural to kind of seamlessly transition it from a university program to something that comes at the city, but that would be step two, I would say. I would say primarily let's focus on getting it in the university meters and done through the university, and then move it into the city.
Do you think people are going to take advantage of this and purposely park illegally just so that you can pay for their citations?
I think that's a legitimate concern, and I think that when structuring the program, you can look at some of the kind of the safeguards in place at other universities. So there's periodic versions of this program. So that would be donations for this week will allow for credit up to certain amounts of parking tickets. So, sorry, I don't think that made sense. I'm going to reword that. So, when they have specific periods where only donations during this time frame will absolve tickets accrued before this point. So it's not like you can donate at any time and just egregiously go park on Green Street on top of the Gamecock or anything like that. But another safeguard in place would be a maximum fine amount. So maybe you only get $25 worth of ticket credit rather than, you can go get a $200 ticket for parking in a fire lane for 24 hours. So that would be the way that I would kind of safeguard against that, and I don't think that it would have potential for abuse, and it would be something to account for when designing the program.
Do you think this only targets a certain socioeconomic status worth of people? Because I feel like some people that can't afford to give up their canned goods, like what are you going to do about that? Like that's not even an option for them.
I think that's a very fair point and a very good point. I think that, when you look at someone who would be afflicted by having to pay these citations, that's precisely the type of person who would need to, have this extra assistance. And I think the great thing about making it Gamecock Pantry specific is it's not just, Gamecock Pantry isn't just canned food, and it's not things that you're replete with. It's, also household goods and personal toiletries, things of that nature. So it's trying to encompass a program that's give what you have rather than one that's, give only this specific thing that you have to go to the store and buy and get a credit for. I think making it kind of that a financial equivalency rather than just by using your leftovers or your surplus to donate, that would, I think, kind of mitigate that problem.
But do you think people with a certain economic status don't even have leftovers?
That is very true, and I think that's why it's so important that we have the students who can give and allow those students to use programs like Gamecock Pantry to kind of take advantage of that. I think that the program takes from where there is surplus and brings it to students of that socioeconomic status who would need extra. So I think that's kind of the pull, I think, on that.
About Wi-Fi, you mentioned that it's like an achievable plan. What are the steps you would take to sort of get that started?
So immediately upon election, I kind of would immediately want to sit down with the VP, Chief Information Officer, and VP of the Division of Information and Technology and kind of start to work there. When looking at their strategic plan for the university, which is published on their website, some of their goals include engaging students in the governance process. So they've taken some really tangible steps there, including creating a student advisory committee to the Division of Information and Technology. So I would want to work with that group of students to start lobbying for it specifically. We have someone on our campaign staff, Kyle Root, who is very involved there and an intern within that office. So he has a very good relationship with Doug Foster, who's Chief Information Officer and the VP. So we would hope to I would work very closely with Kyle to facilitate that relationship and get the conversation started. And a second goal that's listed there on that strategic plan is improving the student online experience. So it's specifically outlined as something that the department has interest in, and I think there's a really nice overlap there to begin the student push. I think a great way would be to use that student advisory council they have to get input not just from student government members, but general student populations on what we should do, how we should do it, and show them the magnitude of the problem, which I think they've also addressed in the budget, but I'll get to that in a second. And then I think the way it would specifically work if we were to do this Wi-Fi overhaul is I would target buildings first. From what I read in the proviso in the budget, the last full-scale overhaul was 8 years ago, and I read another article in Inside Higher Ed that says 3 to 4 years is about the ideal timeline for when you should do these renovations. So we're overdue, and I think they realize that. So I would suggest going through the buildings because the classroom buildings are when students are most making use of that Wi-Fi and the most essential component of it. I would then posit moving it to the residence halls. Possible vehicles for that would be doing it through the housing or in conjunction with the Residence Hall Association. I have a good relationship with both their outgoing president and their incoming president, so they have a pretty decent surplus of funds they could use for this. This is something they've tackled in the past. I remember the year before I began attending the university, so that would have been 2015, Columbia Hall, unilaterally, their hall government improved Wi-Fi within their dorms. So there's kind of a precedent for RHA prioritizing these projects within the residence halls, but I think a collaborative effort between their governance structure as well as our own could really get it done in all of the residence halls. And then moving from campus buildings to residence halls to those areas of campus that are a little bit more difficult to cover, like outside, in between classes, on streets, and things of that nature would be how I would tackle that. I think another concern would obviously be funding. I think ways we can look at that are state appropriations, and this is something noted in Appendix 6, I believe it is. I have it in my backpack if I could bring that out in a minute. But so the Division of IT has identified improvements to our wireless structure as something that is essential for the next few years. So they've requested in their recommendations for how we should allocate our budget about $10 million specifically dedicated to Wi-Fi upgrades. So I think that in conjunction with the student technology fee, which is $200 that every student, undergraduate, graduate, or 17 hours per credit hour if you're a part-time student pays into, would generate revenue that would be applicable here.
So with the Wi-Fi, since the 100% covered Wi-Fi is part of your platform, is that something that's feasible to be done within your term should you be elected?
I think it is, and that would firstly be my goal. But being realistic, if it was something that had to take a couple of years, I would look to pass that mantle off. I have seen places that have been able to do it in a year, and I've seen places that set out from the beginning, let's do it over 3 years. I think that we can look at that. We have two options when faced with, it might take a while. We can say, because it'll take a long time, we shouldn't do it. Or we can get the ball rolling now and pass that off to the next generation. I think a great example of something student government's done with that would be the new student union. That's something that can't happen this year or couldn't happen during Ross's term, but it's been a ball and a torch that's been passed from administration to administration. And if we keep that student push going, then I think it's something that will certainly happen, even if it's not immediately.
What do you think the main responsibilities of the president are?
The student body president?
Yes.
I think the most important one would be serving on the board of trustees from a strictly pragmatic standpoint. That is the highest level of university governance. So the issues that affect the most students are made in that room. So your tuition decided by the board of trustees, student fees decided by the board of trustees, general day-to-day operations, hires, tenure, things like that are all through the board of trustees. So the most tangible, I think the most important thing the student body president can do is make tangible impacts on every student's experience, and serving on the board of trustees is the way by which they can do that the best way. Some other important experiences I would say is you're the face of the student governance, not just to administration and the outside world, but to the student body. You've got to represent and be accountable for everything that comes out of student government or happens in student government.
Sorry, go ahead.
Accountability.
Well, I was gonna say that as the face of everything, you want to be able to make sure that your entire staff and yourself is held accountable. How would you go about making sure that that actually happens?
My entire staff or everyone in student government?
Just in general as the president.
Well, I think it begins internally. It begins with holding yourself accountable, being transparent with things of that nature, and then from there, fostering a culture where individuals are responsible for their actions, whether it's, when you do great, you get praise, and when you do poorly, you get scolded. And, doing what's right kind of lends itself to kind of creating a culture where everyone around you does things correctly. And I think it's important that when there are issues and when there are failings, that they're addressed and remedial measures are made, whether that's termination if it has to be, or some kind of appropriate retribution on their part of the individual. So I think as far as student government internal accountability, we have unilaterally the president, if there's someone on cabinet who's not being accountable, who's doing things that are not congruous with the will of the student body or doing things that are unethical, they can be removed by the student body president. If there's a senator or another position who is not doing the right thing, they can be impeached. So there are mechanisms in place, and I would encourage every member of student government to use them if they're appropriate.
So, having this extensive student government experience and being on the inside for so long, do you feel like there's a general lack of understanding or stigma that surrounds student government for the general student body, like what you guys do?
I think there's one internally as well. And I think it's really interesting because student government, I think, perhaps this year more than ever, has had to define what is our role on campus. And I think there's a misunderstanding of, are we the programming board for campus, or are we a governance body? And are we to facilitate things and interactions between organizations and students, or do we create these experiences for students? And I firmly believe our role is to facilitate and allow for these things to happen organically, not to take it upon ourselves to be the programming body on campus. We have organizations that do it a lot better than us, and that their sole mission and purpose is to do it. So I think that's we got to get our hands out of the cookie jar in a lot of different areas where we're involving ourselves in things that we shouldn't necessarily be involved in. And I think that causes a lot of questions for the students who look at what we do and they go and check our social media and say, what's student government doing? And you see some programs and you see initiatives, and I think there's certainly room for us to have programs and initiatives, but I think should be strictly focused more towards a provision of services or a provision of some type of program rather than events and kind of, I'm struggling to find the word here, kind of like a one-time thing, if that makes sense. I think it's, our goal should be to have annual programming and annual, resources and availability for students. So I think that when students see that we're not necessarily doing things like this, and our name seems to be a bit of a misnomer because my branch, the Senate, is the one that does a lot of the governance. When we take opinions on behalf of the student body when we write resolutions and recommendations, and those aren't as highlighted on the main page as they are. You go look at the U of S CSG Senate page, then you're going to see a lot of the governance stuff. But you look at some of our other things that are student governance, and it's how we lobby legislators through Legislative Action Network, Congressional Advisory Board, and then now the City Advocacy Commission, the newest advocacy group. And, we haven't promoted yet kind of how they're meeting with legislators or looking at their reports and things like that. And they do exist. I just think we need to do a better job of engaging the student body to see the work we do, and not just in kind of the pretty highlights, but also kind of the drudgery and minutia that surrounds things like opposing graduation requirement additions.
How would you actually engage the student body? Like, how would you go about actually making that happen?
Well, I think the first thing is getting people into the room. And I think right now, you look at what student government is, and the eyes are on student government right now. And whether it's for just these 2 weeks, it seems every year, everyone's paying attention. And I think we need to kind of look at, well, how are the campaigns engaging people? They're out tabling on Green Street. They're going to organizations where they're at. And I would posit that we should take efforts to, once we're in office, to continue to visit organizations, continue to reach out, whether that's through comptrollers in the treasurer's office, whether that's through continuing to have town halls. Like we had very successful town halls at the beginning of last semester, and hopefully we'll get another one done before the end of this term to let students give feedback, but also see the work we've done. I think the student government-wide meetings provide another mechanism by which we could share what we're doing with the public. I just think they're technically public meetings, but I've yet to see someone other than, media coverage there who's just a general student wanting to know what we're doing and what we prioritize and give us questions. So I think making those kind of a forum-style meeting where every month your elected officials will come tell you what they're working on and how they're working to serve you, and you can directly question them, is a great way to get people involved.
On top of that, though, if people aren't able to come to the meetings or go to office hours, how are you going to be able to get your message and your platform and everything that's happening out to student body?
That's a great point. I think social media is a great mechanism, but to that same end, there's students who can't be reached by every form. So I think you have to have a all-encompassing strategy to promote your message. So you can't focus on just having a great Instagram or a great Twitter presence. You've got to, or you can't even send blast emails out as student body president because there's some students who don't check their emails. So I think having a strategy that kind of encompasses not just social media or not just email or not just tabling on Green Street, but having all three of those factors, you can really make very minimal the amount of students you're missing, and a day-to-day approachability of just being able to talk to people in Russell House when you're waiting in food, or just communing with people at a personal level is how you can engage them and really see them. And I think that starts at the top, but it trickles down through the administration. So you need a culture where students are approachable. And we did a student government survey this year, and it's just mind-boggling how many people don't know someone who's in student government. And I think for me, as someone who, as you said, has been in student government for a long time, it's hard to think that there's students on campus who aren't being reached by us, but it's something we must endeavor to change.
On top of that, I guess.
Yes.
Sorry. You've talked about transparency a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
But how would you go about being transparent with the student body as well as student media in just everything that's happening?
Yeah, I think we can take a great lesson from what the Student Senate does. In all of our Student Senate meetings, broadcast online and live streamed. I think that'd be a really great thing to implement for cabinet meetings as well. So you kind of keep a sense of formality, I think, because everyone knows they're being watched and being held accountable by the student body because they can see it. But also, the students can watch at any time and say, hey, this is what student government's doing, and how they're looking at that. I think another thing is looking at kind of the way we finance things. Andrew Drummond, our candidate for treasurer, has talked about having the budget posted on Garnet Gate, and I would say even on the university website. I think making use of resources that students make use of, like Twitter, Instagram, Garnet Gate, and the student government website, I think, again, kind of that dual approach of multiple different facets would be really good to let them know how we're spending that money that we're allocated, but also see how we're spending our money internally. And the Senate, really, everything student government's done is in that Senate public information folder. It's just hard to get that out there and hard to get it promoted. Because as someone who's been in there forever, if someone were to ask me, where do I go find this? I can find it for you, and I can share it with you, and I'm happy to share it with anyone at any time. But I think the problem is for general students, it's hard to navigate. And so we need to look at ways that we can streamline that and make it easier. Perhaps we have someone, this is something I advocated for at the beginning of the term, on president's staff who's the webmaster, and a specific staff position devoted just to putting out information online and kind of looking for accountability measures in that transparency.
So voter participation is less than 38%. How do you plan to increase voter participation and engage in that 70% that's not even voting?
Right, I think, and weirdly enough, 27% last year was the highest on record, if I'm not mistaken. And so one thing that I think draws people out is giving people skin in the game. So looking at organizations and saying to them, we don't just have a message that I think you should care about. Let's tailor our message so that it represents your interests, so that student government is doing things that you would care about and want to support. So I think that's one really great way to increase that. But secondly, this is something that has come back to bite me a bit, but freshman year I was adamant when we made changes to the election to keep the runoff elections 2 days. And I think kind of the thing with that for me at the time was we already have problems with student engagement. We already have problems with students not voting. Why would we cut it back to 1 day when we already have people not coming out? So we kept it 2 days, and here we are today. But I think things like that, whether it's the Elections Commission getting more out of the operating budget to promote the elections, to let students know they're happening, looking at different ways we could host our election servers. So self-service Carolina might, is secure and is certainly untamperable, but let's look at other possible ways we could maybe streamline it for the conventional student who doesn't have the 2 minutes to do the multi-factor authentication login and then sit there and identify which candidates they want to vote for, who's the one they vaguely remember from talking to on Green Street. I think it's streamlining the process for students so that they can want to vote and do it really cost effectively and efficiently.
We talked a little bit about transparency so far, but how would you feel about transparency when it comes to campaign finance?
I would welcome it, and that has been a discussion in Student Senate this year. I think it's really important that we look at whether that's disclosure forms, whether that's campaign limits. I think that is a discussion that's overdue.
So would you be in favor of campaign cap, or?
I would be